When you look at tonight's slate for daily fantasy baseball, it's pretty obvious that Spencer Strider is going to be the top pitching option on FanDuel, and that's going to be the case most slates where Strider is available. But the question for tonight is, who's number two? And honestly, you've got half a dozen guys who could legitimately be within that discussion. So our job for today is to decide, can any of them challenge Strider for that top slot? Where should we rank those other guys? How much does salary influence what we do? Are there any value plays in that discussion? We're going to break all that down and get you ready for Tuesday night in MLB DFS. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sanas. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire, here to break down Tuesday night's 10-game main slate with locks set for 7:05 p.m. Eastern for today. Despite it being a 10-game main slate, no big weather notes for tonight. The one I would point out is that temperatures in Minneapolis are much warmer than usual than they've been so far this year for today. 83 degrees at first pitch in Minneapolis. No other games higher than 80. Only one other game above 75 degrees. So I would bump up bats for the Giants and Twins. The problem is that the pitchers there are both pretty good in Alex Cobb and Sonny Gray. Both those guys do suppress fly balls. So in theory, it could bump things up, but I think overall, pretty normal slate as far as weather goes for tonight. We'll dive into the pitching options, let you know the Strider versus the field discussion, and much more in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up later on today, we got our PGA DFS preview of the Charles Schwab Challenge via myself and Brandon Gadula, breaking down that field, letting you know how we're seeing things for that event. To get that and all these podcasts as they are posted, make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. You can also check out the solo shot over on the FanDuel YouTube page. If you like what you hear, leave us a thumbs up on YouTube or leave us a 5-star rating over on Apple Podcasts. The NBA playoffs may be winding down, but there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel Sportsbook, because right now all customers get a no-sweat same-game parlay every weekend when you bet the NBA playoffs. That's right, just place a 3+ leg same-game parlay or same-game parlay plus on any NBA playoff game, and you'll get bonus bets back if you don't win. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Head to the FanDuel app and get a no-sweat same-game parlay every weekend of the NBA playoffs. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Massachusetts Hope is here. GamblingHelplineMA.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support. In New York, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Wyoming and Kansas, 1-800-522-4700 or in Kansas, ksgamblinghelp.com. Louisiana is 1-877-770-STOP. In Maryland, mdgamblinghelp.org. And in West Virginia, go to 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Pitching preview for this Tuesday main slate, Spencer Strider does come in, shocker, with the highest salary of the night. He comes in at $11,500 on FanDuel. Garrett Cole follows him at 11-1. Eduardo Rodriguez facing the Royals at 10-6. Yu Darvish at 10-4. We got Sonny Gray at 10-2 in that potential game with the hot weather. Kodai Senga is 96 with Mackenzie Gore facing Darvish at 94. Alex Cobb against Gray at 9,000 with Drew Smyly, Brian Bayo, and Eury Perez as the others at $8,000 or higher. Now, Strider will be our #1 guy for tonight. Not going to bury the lead there. He is facing the Dodgers, and that's a tough matchup. As we discussed with Charlie Morton yesterday, I don't really want to go at this spot, but it's Spencer Strider. I still love him, and I think he should still be atop our list. And that's because of the strikeouts. We did see Strider break his streak of consecutive starts with at least 8 strikeouts last time out, which is a bummer, but across the full season, Strider still has a 42% strikeout rate. His expected ERA is 2.70. So even with some batted ball issues, he is a menace in that regard. And it's because, sure, you can have issues with batted balls, but if they don't hit the ball a lot, it's not going to matter as much. So that's definitely going to be a factor for Strider, especially in this matchup, but hasn't hurt him as of yet. Looking at the matchups here for Strider, I would not classify any of his recent matchups as being super easy. He's faced some tough teams in there, so it's not, like he's jumping all that far up in competition. I would not classify any of his recent matchups as easy since he faced the Marlins 5 starts ago. And in the past 4 starts since then against tougher teams, he's had 8 strikeouts, 10, 12, and 7. He did let up some runs in those games, which is very possible here, but it's also possible he gets you 12 strikeouts across 7 shutout innings, 6 shutout innings for Strider, I guess we'll say. So it's kind of hard to turn that down. I had Strider projected for 9.42 strikeouts tonight. That accounts for the matchup. It accounts for the fact that he's inefficient with his pitches. It accounts for everything. So I'm going to put Strider at the top of my list and kind of not look back. That's the way things work here when Strider is on the slate. As mentioned, though, the big discussion is who belongs number 2 for tonight. And I think a bunch of guys are in that consideration. Those guys, to me, are all within 0.6 projected strikeouts of each other. Those guys being Sonny Gray, Kodai Senga, Garrett Cole, Yu Darvish, Mackenzie Gore, and Eduardo Rodriguez. All those guys are within 0.6 projected strikeouts for me. The lowest salary in that group is Gore at $9,400. He is at home against the Padres, which is a tough spot, but it's also a Mackenzie Gore revenge game. So I kind of want to give him a swing in tournaments, and in part due to the salary, I'll go here. He's a tournament play. Yu Darvish, probably pretty good for cash games, and I do like Gray there as well, but let's have some fun. Let's have Mackenzie Gore as a tournament option for tonight. I was skeptical of Gore coming into this year. He struggled quite a bit last year, and then at the start of this year, the walks were very high. It seems like he's starting to get at least that part ironed out because across 9 starts, his walk rate is down to 11.5%, and that's still high. Still not where you want it to be. Wastes a lot of pitches, but it's much better than it was. And the walk thing is kind of the one red flag in Gore's profile. Everything else for him is pretty solid. He has a 29% strikeout rate with a 34% fly ball rate, not letting up a ton of hard contact, and that's allowed him to push his ERA down to 3.69. Now, we have seen Gore do this in some good matchups, so he has benefited from that for sure, but he also had 10 strikeouts against the Mets, who have a very low strikeout rate against lefties. The Padres, probably going to be that as well, a good team against lefties, not a super high strikeout team, but again, for tournaments, I think it's kind of fun. I'm going to use Gore at 94, but really, all the guys in this bucket are super viable. To me, I would go for tournaments, Strider 1, I'll go Gore 2 due to the salary, because why not? I would probably go Darvish next, followed by Gray. But if you wanted to flip Darvish and Gray, I wouldn't push back against that. You could put Gray as high as second. I wouldn't push back on that. It's a fun slate. A lot of good options. So pick your favorite, dig into those guys, decide which one you like most, and go from there, because all those guys very defensible for that second slot. As far as the value play, I want to go back to a guy who was pretty good to us last week. That's Brian Bayo. Bayo's salary is $8,500, and I think he has enough juice to be considered at that number. And Bayo is a different pitcher than he was last year. Specifically, he's leaning more on his sinker than he was at the time. And typically, that's a bad thing for DFS. Sinkers don't get a lot of strikeouts, and Bayo's sinker doesn't get a lot of whiffs either. It's about a 16% whiff rate this year, according to Baseball Savant. So it's possible the increased emphasis on that sinker does come back to bite Bayo eventually, but it hasn't yet. His strikeout rate is 24%. He has a 12.2% swinging strike rate, and that's on top of his really good ground ball rate. So I'm not fully sold on the approach. I think that if I were trying to optimize the pitch mix for Bayo, that changeup of his is pretty sick. So I might lean more into that, but it is working. So who am I to nitpick here with what Bayo's doing? He's facing the Angels tonight. They have a 107 WRC plus against righties, which is about an average strikeout rate. So I definitely think Bayo works. Personally, for tonight, I'd rather take advantage of that huge second tier. I think Gore is pretty close to being a value play at 94. I can get to all the stacks I want to use for today while using him. So I like Darvish and Gray plenty too. So might not get here, but if you wanted it down, you want a true value play, I do think Bayo is your best option for tonight. So to me, the strength of this slate is in the mid tier, the second tier pitcher behind Strider. I think all those guys, really fun options for tonight. As mentioned, I think we can get to Gore, we can get to Strider for stacking tonight via the stacks we have, because they're not super, super high salaried. So that to me allows me to potentially ignore the value options at pitcher for tonight. Stacking begins with the Mariners, a team I was high on last night, and I think we should be high on them once again for today. They're facing Luis Medina here, and Medina is doing some things well, getting a good number of ground balls, which means that his 6.88 ERA that he has so far is pretty harsh. I don't think that's representative of what he's doing. But Medina was not lighting it up in AAA either. His ERA there was 7.43 in a small sample. His xFIP was 6.78, largely due to issuing a lot of walks. He has not had the walk issue in the majors, but he has had hard contact issues with a 40% hard hit rate allowed, and that leads to a 5.55 expected ERA across 3 starts. And as always, as we discussed plenty of times, we saw this again last night, you're going to see the starter followed up by a poor bullpen for the A's. So your stack is never truly dead until that game is over. We've had success stacking against the A's this year, and I think that we should keep on doing it here, even with a talented starter who does have some upside. I think that still makes a lot of sense to be high on the Mariners for tonight. Now, I think we should take some time to talk. Jared Kelenic might not be as necessary after he hit a home run last night off of a lefty, mind you, but he has cooled off a bit from where he was earlier on this year. So I want to dig in and kind of see, should we be concerned about that at all? And, based on the home run last night, probably not. But also other stuff in his data, not overly concerning. Over the past 2 weeks, his strikeout rate 29%, which is actually a hair better than it was before this stretch. His ISO entering last night was 233 in that time. Last night was his first barrel in that 2-week stretch, but, it was good. 36% hard hit rate. So it's not quite as good as it was to open this year for Kelenic, but there aren't any blinking red lights saying we should pump the brakes on him. And again, he did just go deep last night. So Kelenic, to me, salary $3,200. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I want to be in on him for tonight. So as part of my Mariner stacks, Jared Kelenic definitely going to be a fixture there for sure. Now, another stack we talked about yesterday was the Marlins, and they were in a stacking option largely out of obligation because it was a pretty bad slate for stacking. This slate is a lot better as far as stacks go, but I also like the Marlins a lot more than I did, so I'm going to be higher on them here. They're facing Austin Gomber, who is letting up too many balls in play right now for a pitcher at Coors Field. His strikeout rate is 15% with a 9% walk rate, which means he's letting up a ball in play 75% of the time. That's not going to work at this park. The hard hit rate is also 45%. So just overall, a lot of hard contact, which led to a 6.98 expected ERA for Gore. The Marlins, much better team against lefties and righties. Their ISO in a small sample is 176 with a 39% fly ball rate, which means when you put them at Coors Field, they are at least stackable. So I am much higher today on the Marlins than I was last night. I think that it makes a lot of sense to go to them here and feel pretty good in doing so. With the Marlins facing a lefty, they're probably going to put John Birdie somewhere pretty high up in the order, and he had leadoff against a lefty on Sunday. And Birdie's speed, I think, makes him a viable option for DFS. He has 8 stolen bases against lefties since the start of last year. So we'll see a lot of guys decrease the willingness to run against the lefty. Birdie, not one of those guys. His ISO against lefties is fine at 145. If he were facing a righty, I would not go here, but he's facing a lefty at Coors Field, letting up a lot of balls in play, which means the odds we get Birdie on base are pretty high, and he can do some damage once he is there. So I think even though he's not like the archetype we typically tend to target, I think that on this slate, in this matchup, he makes a lot of sense. So John Birdie, probably going to be a guy I feel pretty good about for tonight, even though that's not typically the case with the Marlins. Finally, for our third stack, as we discussed, I don't really want to stack the Astros against the righty because they have just so little power right now. They are facing Colin Ray tonight, and I think that opens the door to make the Astros viable. The Brewers had demoted Ray to AAA, but when Wade Miley got hurt, they needed to fill a spot in the rotation. So Ray comes back up. I think their actions tell us we should want to stack against Ray in this spot. And it can be a signal to us. And I understand why the Brewers want to do that, because Ray has a 5.52 ERA. His expected ERA is 4.52. He's letting up a 42% hard hit rate, and it was getting him in trouble. The Astros, as mentioned, still pretty tough against righties. Not tough in not the good sense, pretty rough. 95 WRC plus, minimal power. So it's not great, but it is at least better with Jose Altuve being back. It's one less, dud in the lineup, I guess. So we might not really want to do it. I still am not actively seeking out the Astros, but I think we should do it for tonight specifically. The Astros for me are in the top 3 for stacking. If you want to bump them out, I have 3 more teams we'll talk about in things to watch you could potentially put in here over them. As for Altuve, I don't think we need to be too low on him for right now because he hasn't run yet since coming back, but the injury is to his thumb, so I'd expect the base stealing to be there at some point. He's walking a bunch, which means he's seen the ball pretty well. So the major red flags we could see for a guy coming off an injury are not there for Altuve right now. His salary is pretty low for tonight as well. So you get Altuve for $3,200 in this situation, a spot that I want to stack. I think it makes a lot of sense. So I think that I'm very okay going there when I am stacking the Astros, which I will be doing for tonight. As mentioned, though, there are some other stacks we could consider for that third slot. So let's run through some of those now. One of them is the A's. If you're not willing to stack the Astros, maybe you shouldn't want to stack the A's, but they're facing Marco Gonzalez, and I actually kind of like them either for stacks or one-offs tonight. Gonzalez really struggling right now. He has a 4.91 skill interactive ERA since he trimmed back the usage on his cutter. The A's are better against lefties than they are against righties with a 111 WRC plus. So if you need some salary savers, I think the A's should be on your list, but also like non-salary savers too. Brett Rooker, Esteury Ruiz with all his stolen bases. I think, their studs are actually kind of okay too. So the A's in general, just kind of fine. And the team I'm okay with for tonight out in Seattle. Bobby Miller is making his debut for the Dodgers. He made 4 starts in AAA before coming up here. And in those 4 starts, did let up a lot of hard contact. Didn't get a ton of whiffs. The Braves don't have tape on Miller, which is why I'm okay keeping them a bit lower on this list. But I think from a skill perspective, this is a team that could get to him. So I'm definitely on board with stacking the Braves once again in this spot against Miller. I do think they make a lot of sense. Finally, I'd give some thought to stacking the Red Sox since Griffin Canning. We're up to 6 starts on Canning this year, and letting up a lot of hard contact. It's led to a 6.14 ERA. I think, Canning is fun, and eventually he might get back to his pre-injury form, but we're not there yet. So the Red Sox, at least worth considering here, a team I am okay stacking. So beyond the top 3, beyond the Mariners, Marlins, and Astros, I would say the A's are worth considering, the Braves, and the Red Sox. Let's finish up here with some dinger calls for today. The boring one, we get Yordan Alvarez in a situation where he is facing a guy struggling with hard contact in a better park for home runs than what he typically plays in. He is coming off a double dong last night. We're going to do it. It's as boring can be. Yordan Alvarez, the boring home run call for this Dinger Tuesday. Forgot about that. Dinger Tuesday, Yordan Alvarez, the boring home run call. The fun one, I want to go Ramon Laureano. He hasn't looked great since he came off the IL at the end of April, but it's been fine. He was on the bench last night because he's in a pretty big rut right now, but before that rut began, a couple dingers for him, up to 5 this year. It's not a huge number, but facing a lefty here, so I think there's enough to be at least enticed there. So the dinger calls for today, Yordan Alvarez and Ramon Laureano for your Dinger Tuesday. That is all that we have here on the solo shot for this Tuesday. Back with you once again tomorrow to talk about Wednesday's slate, but also back with you later on today to break down the Charles Schwab Challenge from a PGA DFS perspective. Get that by subscribing to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. If you've got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your MLB DFS lineups. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow to break down Wednesday's slate. This has been the solo shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.